Hey, what's up? I'm Jacob Litzo, your Elixir Mentor, and welcome to another exciting episode of the Elixir Mentor Podcast. This is where we discuss everything related to Elixir, from interviews with enthusiasts, pioneers in the community, to innovative projects and libraries shaping Elixir's future. So let's get started. Today, I'm excited to welcome Saša Jurić, the author of Elixir in Action. Now, it's currently in its third edition, and with extensive experience in web and desktop applications using Elixir, Erlang, and more, Saša is a key figure in the Elixir community. Thank you so much for being here, Saša, and welcome to the show. And to kick things off, could you just quickly introduce yourself for us?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's nice to be here. This is my first live show, so hopefully I'm not gonna mess it up. For those of you who haven't met me, my name is Saša, and I have been programming, for a long time, professionally for more than 20 years now, and I've been doing Erlang and Elixir for the past Erlang since 2010, and then Elixir since 2013. I wrote a book called Elixir in Action, which is obviously about Elixir, and did a couple of talks on the language as well. I guess that's all I have to say for now.
Well, I'm really excited that you're here. I know we were briefly talking before we went live, but Elixir in Action was the first Elixir book that I cracked open. So you saved me. You taught me a lot, I should say. You saved me a lot of time and pain and struggle.
That's nice to hear. Thank you.
Yeah. And I'm sure a lot of people listening, if you haven't read his book, it should be kind of your Elixir Bible on your bookshelf.
Oh, wow.
Well, I mean, when you originally, so you came from the Erlang world, right? What drew you into Elixir when you started seeing it gain some traction or popularity, I guess?
So I should say that before Erlang, I was doing mainstream OO stuff. So C++, C#, Ruby, JavaScript, obviously, you cannot escape that, right? And then I came to Erlang after some considerable experience with this mainstream stuff with OO. I was doing Erlang for a few years, and I was I loved it. When I entered this world, the deeper I got into it, the more appreciation I had for it. And at some point I said okay, nothing beats this stuff. This is terrific stuff, right? But at the same time, I felt that it was missing some of the what we could call modern UX or developer experience. With build tools, with documentation, with some stuff in the language which could help us write more compact programs, or which could help us produce boilerplate, for example. So I was kind of missing some of that stuff, and I was looking into alternatives. There weren't really many. There were a couple of other things that tried to emulate Erlang, but usually they would fail in typical places. And then I discovered Elixir in my search, and basically, when I looked at it, I was impressed totally with it, because it was very early days then. It was early 2013, and you could say it was few months in its existence, because I think Jose officially puts the birthplace of Elixir for the version 0.5, and I came when it was 0.7, so a few months later. And so it was very early days, but still I was impressed how well the documentation is, how mature this stuff is, how it doesn't really deviate from Erlang. It's basically Erlang with some additions. You could almost say Erlang plus in a sense. And I was just blown away, and I immediately added some bits and pieces of Elixir into the production that we have that was based on Erlang, which is something very untypical for me. So I usually wait for the stuff to reach version 10.0 or something, right? So I'm very risk averse. But I looked at it and I said okay, this is basically Erlang with some mainly language level and build time level additions, and this is solid stuff. It's supposed to be reliable, and so I integrated it with Erlang production, and I really loved working with Elixir. It helped me, it boosted my developer experience, from my perspective.
That's awesome. I feel the same way when I started writing Elixir. So when you first discovered it, you were working in Erlang daily at that point.
Yeah, I was working daily at that point. With Erlang, almost like exclusively. I still was doing some bits of Ruby because had like our main system was Ruby, again with JavaScript, but Erlang was kind of my main driver at that point. Yeah.
Okay, so now I'm curious, did you write any books before Elixir in Action?
No, I didn't. I wrote some technical documentation as a part of some previous job, but yeah, not like a book. Yeah.
Okay, so what made you want to write an Elixir book?
Yeah, that's well, it was kind of a more. It fell into my lap, so to speak, right? So I was actually thinking about writing an Elixir book at the time, because it was early days, the community was small, and I loved this stuff, and I did, as I said, I did Erlang a lot, so I was confident that I could write something on the topic, and I like to teach, right? So I wouldn't do it as a full-time job, but what I really like about teaching is this challenge of trying to present a complex topic in an approachable way, right? And this is why I like doing different forms. I used to do a lot of I actually used to work like as a part-time teacher back in university when I was still a student, and so I like this stuff, right? And I was thinking like maybe I should write a book on it. And then Dave Thomas announced the book, and I thought to myself like, okay, I'm not going to write a book. Obviously, there's no need. We have a much better author who's going to do a much better job. But then, as Dave Thomas basically announced it, what happened is there was a lot of people coming to the community. So before that he announced the book, there was like, I don't know, maybe 10 to 20 of us on a mailing list, and then you could just see this intake of people, and the buzz was starting to generate. The word has been spread, and I guess at that point, Manning figured out that they should also write a book of their own, and so they actually approached me because I wrote a couple of blog posts on the subject, and so I guess I was like maybe one of the 5 people who were blogging on the topic at that point. And I like to say that I was probably the only one who was crazy enough to accept the offer.
I mean, I'm very appreciative of it. I know undertaking a book has to be a lot of work.
Yeah, it is. It was like a full year, I did it at my free time, right? So I was doing like normal, regular, full-time job. And then I did a lot of stuff on weekends. It wasn't hard work for me, though. I really enjoyed doing it, right? So it was just so much fun. Maybe like the most difficult part about writing a book is that you have to read it yourself for like 20, 30 times. And at some point, you just cannot bring yourself to do it one more time. But otherwise, I really love this job, and I spent a lot of time thinking about like how to structure it. And as I was writing, I made some changes to the plan, so it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm sure. Like, what was the date of the first edition published?
Oh, I have to check it up, but next year is going. It was, I think, around May. So next year it should be 10-year anniversary.
Okay, wow. Well, I'm sure, like, what kind of challenges did you have when you were laying out the book, and you were going to write it? Because I'm sure documentation wasn't close to what it is today.
Well, from what I remember, the documentation was pretty good back then as well.
Oh, was it?
Oh, yeah. There weren't these guides, so that's definitely what I remember. There were no guides.
Okay.
Like these tutorials that you have, and I think that Jose actually at some point sat and wrote one. Yeah, so I kind of laid out the plan. It was like super ambitious because it's your first book. You really don't know how many pages you're going to need, and so like for example, what is currently so the current chapters 2, 3, and 4. That's I think something like 150 pages or so. Should have been just one chapter. And then as I was just starting to type and like, okay, I'm burning way too much text, or rather, this plan is too ambitious. I was supposed to have like one final chapter where we put everything into practice and build like a more complex system, which is kind of inspired by what I was doing at the work at the time. That totally fell off. So yeah, I tried to make a narrative. I tried to turn it into a flow where you kind of learn something, and then in the next section you build on top of it. And another thing that I really try to do is to kind of first show you a simple way which is wrong, but I don't tell you that this is wrong. And then in the next chapter, I would tell you like, okay, we did it like this, but here's the problem with what we did, And so I show you the problems, and then we make some changes. And then in the next chapter, you're going to learn of another set of problems with this approach. And so you kind of, this mimics the journey that I had myself, So which took me like a couple of years until the pieces fell into the proper place. And yeah, I tried a lot to make like this logical narrative such that you read it, that you read the book linearly rather than skipping, and that you kind of always have this sense of a build up. So like it starts very boring. I like to say like the chapter 2 is just a bunch of declarative facts. It's a large chapter, just establishes the vocabulary. You kind of have to survive it, and then things start to pick up. And I think the later chapters are more exciting, at least in my view.
Yeah, I think the overall flow of the book is good though, because especially if you're starting off not knowing anything about Elixir, you kind of need your first couple of chapters to lay the groundwork.
Exactly.
Yeah, you do a good job explaining, functional programming, immutability, and all the reasons for it. So it's super beneficial.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess, yeah, as you were laying out your first edition, right? You've never been an author before, and what were your biggest challenges with that? Did you know how you wanted to explain things and teach, and kind of what order you were going to teach in?
Yeah, I had a pretty good idea about that, So there were like, of course, more like technical challenges. Like I'm writing chapter number 2, and so you have to introduce modules and variables and functions, and like in what order are you going to do that, and like the operators and things like that, such that you don't reference stuff that you haven't introduced before, But I think that like in Elixir, it's like, or in Erlang as well, you will have this natural progression of you're going to start with functional, like basic vocabulary, then introduce, I don't know, pattern matching, and then recursion and loops, and then you move on to the concurrency world, and you build it from there. So like the strategy was pretty good. One thing that I wanted to try is because like I was writing the book somewhat in parallel with Dave Thomas, right? And like how do you compete with Dave Thomas, as a first-time author, So that was like for me, like if I start to compete with Dave Thomas, I'm going to lose this, I'm going to lose my mind, and I'm going to write a shitty book, right? So that's definitely not what I wanted to do. And so while I didn't read, I read his book only after I wrote mine. But so the only thing I did was like I took a look at the table of content of like he was in the process of writing it. So that was like kind of like his plan. And I figured like, okay, I'm going to focus this book more on OTP, because judging by the content, he's going to be more into the functional side of it. And I kind of wanted to make it complement rather than compete, And from what I heard from many people, and I saw it on Elixir forum, for example, people would recommend like you should read, if you have the time, you should read both books, so you read a little bit of Dave's, and then you go a little bit to Elixir in Action, back and forth. And some people reported that they really enjoyed it. And I think that like, of course, there's some overlap between those books, but I kind of tried to make Elixir in Action add something to the table without taking away from anything else, right? And so that was kind of also a part of the challenge.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, I like that you touch on OTP processes, and then even like how you should release an app. And I think that's important, because a lot of people don't know how to deploy their application after they build it.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, I wanted to make like so in my experience, often when I would be reading a book, the last 1 or 2 chapters were kind of like some advanced topics which you maybe don't want to read about, or something, and I wanted to make like the book really, you want to read it from the first page to the last page, right? And the last page should be equally useful as the first one. And so that's release, and that's why, for example, macros are not treated at all in Elixir in Action. That was a kind of a weird decision. It took me some time until I accepted it. So original plan was to have something on macros, but I really couldn't find a place where to put them in, and the flow goes really strong into the concurrency and OTP territory, right? And then it's like figured, okay, if I add a macros chapter, like half of the people are not going to read it anyway. It doesn't add to the narrative, right? So I kind of dropped that stuff. Yeah, but I would say that like OTP is when we talk about Erlang and Elixir world or ecosystem, OTP is kind of the most unusual thing, right? Because this is where you get like these microservices like, or I don't know, DevOps like features in the language where you can build this kind of smaller independent programs and make them fault tolerant and whatnot.
Yeah, I think that's what draws a lot of people into Elixir, right? They want the OTP, they want the processes and the concurrency. So I feel like you probably made a smart decision avoiding, the metaprogramming
I didn't.
and concentrating more on processes for sure.
Then I did write like a 6-part series. It's on my blog, dearlangeles.com. So that was written like I said, like, okay, I also want to write about macros, and then I wrote it as a blog series.
Oh, nice! I'll have to check that out.
Yeah,
I just
really, sorry for interrupting, but really, like, you should read Chris's book if you want to get into metaprogramming.
I actually just read Chris's book, and it's really good. I highly suggest it because I have a video course that I'm slowly releasing, and I just did a metaprogramming module, and all that stuff helps so much because macros are very confusing when you first start trying to write them. And then when you realize that you want to teach how to write a macro or how they work, you realize how little you actually understand about them.
Yeah, and I wrote like a lot of macros, and even today I kind of I'm having problem on like thinking, like consolidating my thoughts on like how am I supposed to do this, and so and like in recent years I try to avoid them as much as possible, kind of change sides, and I would like say almost never write macros.
Yeah, I don't write them often, and honestly I struggle to read other people's macros when I'm reading code. It's very hard to read.
Yeah, a lot of these quotes, unquotes, unquote splices, and then they can also be more rigid, right? Because you cannot really do quite everything with macros like you can do with regular functions and data. And I think like I'm working for the past few years as a sort of I call myself also Elixir Mentor because I try to avoid the term consultant, but that's basically like advisory consulting role. And I think like what I frequently do as a part of my job is like do pull request reviews where I advise people like you should turn this macro into a function, and this is how you can do it, right? And usually we end up with much simpler, clearer code.
Nice. Yeah. No, that's definitely true. So where do you spend most of your daytime? Do you just full-time you consult for Elixir?
I basically hook up with a team, someone who approaches me typically, and then I do like pull request reviews or I don't know, any sort of architecture meetings or discussions, design sessions. I mostly don't crunch features, but I can do like refactorings and those kind of things. So kind of more like general purpose themes strictly related to Elixir.
Okay, nice. When did you notice like a shift in popularity in Elixir where you actually could go full time to, helping people?
Yeah, this is a really good question. So I started doing it in 2019, but probably I could have done it maybe a year or two earlier. I think it was the time was ripe already. Something like so the second part of last decade, right? Definitely the first few years was like even difficult to find Elixir job on the market, I would say.
Oh, I'm sure it was. Were you still writing Erlang code at that time then, from like 2010 to 19-ish?
So I was writing Erlang code, I think, until 2016. That's when we made switch. So I was working for like a small German startup. I actually started working for them roughly around the same time when I started writing the book. and it was a pure Erlang job. But at some point, we 2016, we figured like we have to make some radical changes to our code and design. It wasn't a pivot, but it was basically a change that would like throw away like 90% of our code base. And I kind of just dropped the bomb, I said like, how about maybe taking a look at Elixir since we're already doing this? And our CTO, Sebastian, he is a very open-minded, very curious person. So he just spent a weekend with Elixir, and he said like, we're gonna do Elixir. And then basically, since we're throwing away the code base anyway, right? And so like he was totally blown away with it as well. And then basically since 2016, I've fully switched to Elixir. Did very little Erlang since then. I can read it still, but not write it so much.
Okay. So 2016 was a major turning point for Elixir popularity, probably, or do you think you kind of lucked out because of that rewrite?
I think around that time, or maybe a year later, it was already a good season for finding Elixir jobs. I think there were like a bunch of companies doing it on the market. Yeah.
Nice. I can't remember. I had a buddy in my ear, constantly telling me that I need to check out Elixir, like I'm going to love it. And I think I ignored him, and I was like, yeah, I'm sure it's awesome. But I think I ignored him for like 3 years until in 2021, I finally decided to check it out. And then there's no turning back.
Yeah, it is difficult, right? So you kind of hear that buzz, and then you sort of have to invest some effort to learn about it, and you don't necessarily see the benefits immediately. Like I was frustrated. That's also part of the reason how I came to write the book. So we used it at our work, and I was the only one using not Elixir. It was Erlang at the time, right? But so I wrote like this service, and it's like super simple architecture, does a lot of the stuff. This is the origin of that famous table from Elixir in Action that makes the round where I was comparing this service to another one written in Ruby. And it handles like a pretty impressive load for us at the time, does, just works, not because I was like super skillful, but because the technology really helps it, going even when there are problems. And I try to explain this to my colleagues, and they're kind of like, yeah, this is okay, but, we're going to still stick with Ruby. We're not going to expand further into this Erlang territory. And, basically I started, writing blog posts just to try to make it more clearer, why am I so excited about it, and that's kind of what led me to the role of being an author, right?
Mm-hmm. No, I love that. Well, I think like at least coming from like an OO background, if you don't have a reason to check out Elixir, you're not going to really spend your time there because it's not building on your current skills. Because then you learn Elixir like I did, and you totally abandon the OO stuff, and you fully take it on.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and that's why I suppose many people just kind of say like, okay, this is interesting, but do I really need it? So like often my pitch is like, do you need fault tolerance? Like what is the opposite of fault tolerance? It's intolerance. It's, a service which crashes, which has a lot of bugs, or which just stalls, which is laggy, which is not responsive. Like, do you want to have this in production? And the answer is probably not, irrespective of your actual business case or the scale. Like you could maybe have just 10 people using it, but still you want this stuff to be reliable, right? And so this is where I think the Erlang, first and foremost, with OTP, can help you not automatically, but a lot of stuff actually works just out of the box. And then, of course, Elixir with its ecosystem can make it make this more approachable. You can get like more quickly to something working, right?
Yeah, I definitely, when I first started learning Elixir, I was like, I had a reason for it, right? I wanted the concurrency. I was building a marketplace, so it made sense. But I was like forcing it. I was writing it like a Node.js project. And so I had a really hard learning curve. I probably rewrote my code base at the beginning like 3 times.
Oh yeah.
And then you slowly pick things up, and you're like, I'm trying to do this like it's an object-oriented thing, and I'm not doing it right.
It was exactly the same for me with Erlang, right? So I just tried to push it so hard into object-oriented language, and so I was using like gen servers as objects, for example. I was using the ETS table to kind of have like mutability, And but I mean, you write this code, and then if you reflect on it, if you think about it, like sleep it over, and then you'll figure out, okay, this isn't really good, and that's kind of what helped me, see the light and go into the proper direction.
Yeah, when it finally clicks for like transforming data versus mutating it, and how you actually work with like data and maps and passing things around, I think that's when you start writing. Well, honestly, functional languages kind of force you to write clean code, in my opinion. You can't really write nasty functions.
It's debatable.
I mean, obviously you can, but I feel like it's a little harder.
They definitely prevent some stuff. Like you cannot just, for example, I remember what I was doing in OO days, and my colleagues as well. Like you need to store something, you just stash it into a state variable, right, into a member of of a class, and then you end up with like this mega class that has a bunch of stuff which shouldn't be part of the state at all, but you just do it because it's there, or you just use some global variable, because it's more convenient. So like, functions kind of functional sort of prevents you from doing some of those things, but still the code can be quite nasty if people don't pay attention to it. It's not just like,
Don't you just spin up gen servers to hold state for you, global variables and state?
Yeah, that's a bit more ceremony. At some point you realize like, okay, no, I think what I'm trying to do, and what I see people kind of not always getting it right, and I didn't do it myself as well, is like make it functional first, just like, can I get this function that gets the data and that gives me the result, and then from there move it on to concurrency model, right? And I think that Elixir in Action basically tries to push this narrative, like you build this simple data structure, this to-do list, and then we kind of take a look at how can you expose it in a concurrent way.
Mm-hmm.
But start with functional first,
Yeah, I think I approached it right. I didn't touch processes or I touched processes, but I didn't really dive into gen servers until I fully understood how to write my code base with Elixir in general, because I was constantly writing things wrong and treating, like, if I knew about, or if I understood how gen servers worked early on, I would have used it as like global state and completely used them in the wrong manner.
Yeah, exactly. So that's good. I mean, but it's a part of the process, right? You cannot expect to be like write perfect code on day one,
Yeah, you kind of have to do it wrong to know you're doing it wrong, and then you learn, right?
Like everything else in life,
Exactly. But I think like your book's a great spot to start, just because the ordering that you do everything in, like you don't introduce processes until like part 3, right?
Part 2, I think. Yeah, part 2.
Okay, part 2.
Yeah, but that's like 1/3 of the book is completely no processes. There's not even process. There's like no mixed project at all, So you're just basically doing IEX session, or you write like a single file and then you just run it with Elixir, or you just load it into IEX and then do something with it. But like mixed projects come around half of the book, So
yeah, I think that's great. And then you slowly start touching on like supervisors and all of that stuff as well. And I think it's a good ordering, because you're not really ready to grasp how a supervisor works.
Yeah, exactly. So it kind of takes time, to get there. And that was basically the part of the challenge, kind of, like this is such a super exciting topic, but how do you present it in this incremental way, such that you basically don't ask a lot of questions at any point. Kind of everything is clear, but of course, obviously, don't know a lot of stuff. But you progress forward,
Yeah, and I will say the Elixir community is a great place to find nice people when you're new and you don't know what you're doing.
Oh yeah. So Jose set the tone very early on. I mean, like I basically, before Elixir, I didn't really want to participate in any kind of like community or forum or something, because those discussions like could be very hard, but basically for Elixir you didn't have a lot of resources, so you have to go to the mailing list. I mean, typical interactions before Dave Thomas announced the book, there was like 20 of us, and most of us were just asking questions, and there was Jose, there was Yuri, and Alexei. They were like the early members, of the core team, and they would be answering, and so I had to go there. But Jose was like always so nice, and he would reply immediately. And even if you ask him like, why did you do something like this? Why didn't you do it like that? And then he would give you like a clear explanation. He was very patient about it, and I think it kind of set the tone for the rest, for the next generations.
Yeah, I agree. Like his patience and ability to communicate in a very like calm and nice manner is pretty amazing.
Yeah, and so it's like that in the community. It's a very nice community. I mean, I haven't been to others. I'm pretty sure that you can find those examples elsewhere as well. We are not large community like I don't know, say JavaScript, for example. So probably it also helps as well.
Yeah, I know I've said on like other podcasts, but I was scared of the internet trolls when I started making videos. I was like, they're going to come for me. I'm going to get torn apart. And luckily it hasn't happened. Like even when I make mistakes, I don't get torn apart.
Okay, yeah, I keep my fingers crossed it's going to stay that way.
Yeah, I hope so. I think as long as everyone keeps, I try to be nice to everyone, even if, someone says something rude, I just try to not respond in the same manner, just respond in a nice way. And I think as long as everyone keeps doing that, it'll stay this way.
Yeah. We'll see. I mean, I'm kind of happy myself that it's a bit selfish thought really, but that Elixir didn't take off like in a very explosive way, So I know that we all we want it maybe to some extent, but this more kind of stable growth is more organic, I think, and it kind of gives us time, so that every generation actually has some room to teach, the next generation something, and so you can kind of progress in a better direction rather than have like I don't know, people just bringing stuff from other paradigms which do not fit into the beam, And so I like this thing, and I think that as a consequence of that, everyone is kind of nicer to each other.
Yeah, and I feel like just rollout of new features and things with it being slower is just it's safer and more stable for the language as well.
Oh yeah, precisely. So there's a lot of I'm like super impressed how Jose handles all of this. I mean, Elixir like today. So I was there at 0.7, and I started writing a book around maybe a few months later. So it was like more than a year before 1.0 appeared, right? And Elixir today is not much different than Elixir back then, and I actually didn't have many cases where I had to like do a lot of rewrites in the writing of the first edition, for example.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you now that your third edition just came out in February, right?
Mm-hmm.
How much has changed from your first to the third?
Yeah, so I mean there have been some changes. The biggest change was really in the second edition, right? So in the second edition, what happened between first and the second was that we got new child specifications for the supervisor, and we got this what would I call supervisor as a function, right? Basically, you don't have to write the module which implements the callbacks, but you can just say like, start me a supervisor with these children, and so that's a very convenient change. And I had to change a lot of the middle section of the book, basically the part 2 and some pieces of the part 3. The addition of registry also made me change the narrative, because previously in the first edition we built our own registry and then we replaced it with a third-party library, but now we had a stock one, so I had to do something else there. And so like these parts were heavily rewritten, especially the supervision parts. In the third edition, I mostly just carefully reread the stuff and fixed any errors and made some minor updates. The last chapter, it was the OTP release. So previously we used Distillery, but basically almost immediately after second edition was released, Elixir added mixed release task.
Okay.
So that's the curse of being the author, right? Basically your book becomes obsolete as soon as it gets out. So now
as soon as it's printed, right?
Yeah. Now we're going to get types, for example, right? But it's still in the works, so I have a few years until then. So the last chapter is completely rewritten. I added the section on Docker, so building like a simple image and a container, and I added a very brief treatment of microservices, somewhere in chapter 1 in introduction, just a comparison of like microservices to Elixir, because that's a question frequently asked.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the only other like quasi minor change would be the runtime configuration that didn't exist in the second edition, right? So now we have like this runtime config, and I switched to that. So like mostly minor technical updates. Yeah.
Yeah, I was quite impressed because I never really looked back. I never really looked back at, old versions, right? And when I was talking with Jose, I was lucky to have him on Elixir's 12th birthday. And we were talking about the first commit, and we pulled up the first commit, and like a lot of the syntax and code is exactly the same as it is today.
Yeah. I think I'm pretty sure that like 10 years ago, I would be able to understand modern Elixir, so the changes aren't big. We get like every release, every new version brings something new to the table. So there were like stuff like pry, I think, DBG, we got support for dates and times, we got support for releases. Yeah, I don't know what else, I would have to check the list myself. So we always get something, but still, like it feels like the core of the language has been stable since that 0.5, which is basically what Jose considers to be the first.
Which is really wild to me to like be that well planned and execute something that you're that happy with, once people start using it.
Yeah. This is kind of, it feels rare, So I don't see that we're gonna have like Python 2 versus 3 or those kind of situations here. Although now, I mean, with types, it's going to be a bigger change, but still, as far as I understand, they're going to be gradual and optional. So basically, you could still ignore that stuff if you want. So I'm curious to see how it's going to look like. I'm definitely, happy that we're going to get them, So
I'm not like overly opinionated on it, but obviously, like I believe type safety and stuff is important, but I really like their approach to it right now, where you kind of just get console logs and warnings versus anything more strict at the moment.
Exactly. Yeah. So I mean, this is how it has frequently been. So for example, tying back to the mix release task, I recall that like people were pushing frequently, like, why don't we have a release task in mix? Why doesn't Elixir support that out of the box? And Jose said, like, I'm not really exactly sure how it's supposed to work, and so we're just gonna let Paul, right? So Bitwalker, he did the work on Distillery, and previously it was, I think, EXRM, if I remember correctly. Before that, and just let him, explore this. We're gonna take a look at, how it works as a third-party library, and then, once we have a clear idea, then we're gonna add them to the language. So the same way, I think you could say with types. So they're doing like this research, and now they're finally bringing some bits and pieces to Elixir. But I think the last time I saw Jose on Elixir Conf Europe, he still said, like, we're still not completely sure if it's gonna land, right? So he still kind of keeps it open.
Yeah, no, I like that. It's wild to me because I've been a part of startups, I've run startups, and when you get a community and users using your product, it's hard to stay that patient and roll things out in a smart manner, because you want to keep everyone happy. And I'm impressed by, I guess, the resilience to like not jump on the hype train by like the core team.
Yeah. They always seem to take a lot of time to think things through, and that's very commendable. And I'm like happy. So this kind of makes me, as a book author, for example, I'm not super worried that I'm gonna have to make some major rewrites, even if the types do land. I kind of also strategically placed, again, the book on OTP, which is a stable part. So I mean, this stuff is now pretty much solid. Although, ironically enough, this is the part where I had to make big changes in the second edition. But yeah, still, like gen server is always going to be a gen server, and supervisor is going to be a supervisor, and so a solid language is, as I said, like pretty stable. Like even when I was writing the first edition, I recall only one major point where I had to like go back and do like lots of changes to a bunch of chapters, and that was when maps were introduced. Because back when I started, we didn't have maps. So we were using records, and then the maps were introduced at some point in Erlang and then in Elixir. And then I had to make some more significant changes. So this was like the biggest change, that I had to make in the book since then, all the way to the current point. So the language is very stable, and that's great for us developers, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. As I'm going to say mentoring, since you don't like the word consultant. When you're mentoring companies and other people's code bases, are you mostly helping people integrate to Elixir or make a certain specific piece of their code base just work better, that if they're already in Elixir?
Yeah, that's a kind of tough question to answer. I'm like, so they sometimes get stuck. There are like different kind of scenarios. So sometimes people get stuck with something that they're not really certain how to solve, and then they ask me to help them. So I could like maybe unstuck them with some problem, for example. Other times, that's what I try to do a lot, is just I look at pull requests and I look at the kind of code that they produce, and try to see the opportunities for improvement. Usually you can find those. Yeah.
What are the biggest pain points you see in like production-based projects with Elixir? Are there like common drawbacks that people kind of fall into that you see a lot?
Yeah, I see a lot of overuse of macros. That's probably, I would say, number one. Also, a lot of usages of patterns to simulate types. So people will write like the function clause and then add a when guard specifying like this parameter has to be an integer and that parameter has to be binary, and so on and so forth. And yeah, I don't think it's even a matter of personal taste. I just think it's a lot of noise, and it's not a good way to write code. Otherwise, it's kind of just I see a lot of, I think, overcomplicated code. A lot of the work that I do, I have been doing with a bunch of teams, is like taking a look at the code and then proposing a much simpler idea. Which is maybe doesn't have all the bells and whistles, but for the actual scenario that you have is going to be good enough. So I'm kind of going down the minimalist route, and so this is something that I tend to do often. So I would like just look at the pull request, and then maybe I would just propose it, or I would actually write a sketch of it if possible. Rather than just throwing some ideas and make you work harder. I would just maybe branch off and try to make like, okay, so how about this approach? What do you think about this? And so yeah, those kind of things.
Yeah, having an outside opinion on code that you like, when you're in the weeds writing your own code, people tend to overcomplicate things a lot.
Yeah, yes. I mean, the code is, there are definitely, I see similarities between code and the book or the prose, right? And in a sense, I treated Elixir in Action as a sort of a software project, Obviously, there are, of course, differences, but there are a lot of similarities. Ultimately, what I like to say is, code is a form of communication, right? So it's written first and foremost for the people, So like I write the code, and then you're gonna maintain it, and you're gonna read it, and you're supposed to understand how am I solving this problem, right? And so it's all about making it clear and concise, right? And so yeah, I think that like when you're writing a prose, when you're writing a text, you will typically have a reviewer, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not for your personal blog, obviously, but for a book, no publisher is going to publish your book without a review.
Right.
A lot of reviewing is actually done. A lot of eyes read the book before it's actually released. And I think you should do the same thing with code as well, if we're talking about production code, because it's the team that maintains that. Down the line, someone else is going to read it. Maybe you're not going to be available. Maybe you're going to move someplace else, and not going to be available for answers. And so it should be reviewed, and it should be clarified such that, other people are understanding it, And so when I read the pull request, when I'm reviewing, like my main number one goal is like, do I understand how you're solving the problem? Like, maybe it's not a good solution, but if I understand it, then the code is good.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, maybe you have like a top-notch solution, but I completely have no idea what it's doing. And then, what can I do with this? How can I maintain it? How can anyone else maintain it? Right. So you need like a fresh pair of eyes to actually take a look at it and like see, okay, can I understand what goes on here?
Yeah, I agree. And honestly, reviewing code is probably one of the best ways to learn too as a beginner and being reviewed because you kind of learn to take criticism instead. Well, not really criticism. It's you learn from your mistakes instead of taking it like a personal attack when you get a comment on your code.
Yeah, but you can always form it into the questions more than a comment. So
Hmm.
like, that's a very simple trick. Like, you wouldn't say like this sucks or I don't like this. Maybe, so you could say like I had problems understanding this piece of code. That's a valid statement without
Hmm.
criticism. Like it's not about you, it's about me. Like I'm reading this piece
Yeah,
of code
yeah.
and I have a problem understanding it. Or then if I actually am able to figure it out, like I say, okay, how about maybe rehashing it or restating it like this? And then I could provide a snippet included there, so those kind of tricks help. You have to, do a lot of work as a reviewer, but you learn a lot as well in the process.
Yeah. Well, and you were saying that you see macros overused a lot. I think where you can run into with macros, if you're writing them for everything, you kind of create these magic black boxes that you're just assuming they work the way you intend them to, and you're not actually, you know,
Yeah.
understanding what they're doing in the background.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that like you really don't need macros almost never. Like maybe if you're writing a library, like say Phoenix, you could say that
Hmm.
argue. I'm even wondering whether Phoenix or Ecto need macros, but they probably do, especially Ecto because it does some magical stuff behind. But so if you're writing a library, maybe you need a macro. Uh, in your like end product, your business app, I would say almost never.
Yeah, I agree with that statement for sure. And like when you're using macros, you're just blindly injecting code into your module too. So you don't know if you don't know what it's doing, it could be a very dangerous.
This is one of my pet peeves, so for many libraries you like to use foo.bar and I'm like, okay, so what did just happen to my module?
Hmm.
And it's typically not explained anywhere, so I have to like go into the code and I have to like read that stuff. And so like, I mean, again, sometimes you need it. I have some libraries which do that as well, which have to be used. And so it is what it is, but you try to think about like when you're going down that path, can I make it simpler? Can I turn it into a function which someone invokes? It's not going to always be possible, but have valid reasons for dealing with macros, and typically it's something you need to do at compile time, like for the sake of optimization.
Hmm.
Like string module is a good example, right? So the string module of Elixir is built at compile time from the Unicode definition. It builds all of these clauses and pattern matches and whatnot. So like, do I need it at compilation time? Most often, I think the answer is going to be no.
Yeah. And I think Chris in his metaprogramming book, he even says, don't use them if you don't need them.
Exactly. Yeah, the first rule of the macro club, right?
Yeah, don't use them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's funny. I guess as you are helping and mentoring companies, are there popular tools and libraries that you prefer to use in your daily development environment?
Yeah. So, of course, I mean, Phoenix and Ecto are definitely pretty much the bread and butter for everyone out there on the web. If I would give one shout out, then it would be Oban library.
Mm.
Oban is incredibly versatile and underused library. I mean, people do use Oban a lot, but there are so many scenarios where it can be a good fit. So having this persistent job queue, which is in the same place as the rest of your data, right? So in the same database. So you can make a lot of this stuff very consistent and transactional. Like a typical example is you want to send an email, say as a part of the registration process, right? So if you write something into the database and then send an email, you have like a distributed transaction. You have two different systems interacting. So maybe you save to the database, but you fail to send an email, and so this kind of failed. Or if you send an email first, then maybe your system shuts down and you don't store the record to the database, right? But with Oban, you make it transactional because you store the record and you store the job record is a part of the same transaction. So it's either all or nothing. And then the job is going to be executing with like retries and whatnot. You could still fail, of course, but the chances are much slimmer because you're going to survive. Like even if the whole system is restarted and whatnot, you'll still be able to run that job. And so it makes it so much easier and so much more consistent. I had like recently a case with clients where they needed they had like the limited set of resources like GPUs, and so you have like customers or end users, in queuing for that GPU. So they needed like a queue that had some amount of concurrency, and they were thinking about doing it with Redis and combination of Redis and PostgreSQL. And then like when we started discussing this and thinking about it, we figured like, okay, like we can do everything in Postgres, and actually Oban implements already, the queue in Postgres, and so we did it with Oban. So basically it lifted a lot of the implementation from us. And so like at first look, you wouldn't think that this is even something which is required for which suits the job library, but it actually does. So Oban is really one library I would like to single out. And
I agree with that. It's a very good tool to keep in your tool belt.
Extremely versatile. Yeah, a lot of stuff that you need to do, interact with other services and whatnot. Almost always Oban is going to be the way, because you should always ask yourself, like, if I'm interacting with a remote service, what happens if the server is rebooted at that point, right? So am I going to pick this up later on or not, And so frequently you need to enqueue an Oban job to get those retries, to get persistent jobs. Yeah. The second one I want to name is REQ, REQ by Wojtek. So this is relatively new stuff built on top of Finch, which is, I think, becoming de facto HTTP client library these days. It's the one that I would definitely recommend, and I think it's going to be like the end game, of HTTP clients. So REQ, definitely take a look at it. It's extremely well designed, has support for tests for mocks, right? And has support for like different higher level features such as, decoding different kind of payloads and whatnot. Has this plug style of dealing with requests and responses. And so really nice library. Totally recommend.
Oh, nice. I'm glad I learned this. I just pulled it up on GitHub.
Yeah, REQ.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for sharing that one. It is now starred, and I will be checking that one out later.
Okay, let me know how you find it. Yeah,
I will for sure. Any other ones?
Well, I'm sure there are many others, so nothing comes to mind at this point.
Okay.
I'll probably remember like immediately when the show is over. Yeah,
of course, that's how it always works.
Yeah, but the ecosystem is, in general, I think the ecosystem is nice. It's not too big, but it's okay. Yeah, I usually find what I need. One thing that I would also like to mention is somewhat related to this topic is the article by Wojtek. Also, it was on Dashbit. I'm gonna have to look it up for the link, and it was about SDKs. So what he argues is basically that like for SDKs, when you want to interact with these remote services, like I don't know, Stripe. I think he has a Stripe example, and I was like just doing yesterday something with New Relic. Like instead of pulling the full library that does that, like you could actually use his REQ and just make like a simple HTTP request, and because you typically don't need like all of these features that the full API client or the full SDK supports, and then you're not going to have to bring in a lot of these modules that you typically do. Like for example, Google APIs, they are notorious. Google libraries for Elixir, they bring like such huge amount of modules that your startup time actually can suffer at production. So that's a nice example of how you could. Yeah, there's the blog. Where should I post it? I'm gonna post it right on the chat link.
It might not let you do the link. Are you talking about the SDKs with REQ, the Stripe
Yes,
one, June
exactly.
25th? I'll
Yes.
post that. I think it lets me do links.
Okay.
And I'll add that to the description. I think that's one of my favorite things too, staying in the Elixir ecosystem, is we don't have thousands and thousands of dependencies when we start a project.
Yeah, it's typically manageable and reasonable, and you start with those stock things, and you don't really need a lot, as in my experience, other than like these more general purpose one, like Oban, for example, REQ and
Hmm.
things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I like that a lot. When you start looking ahead, like maybe let's see, it's about to hit your 10-year reunion from your book, right?
Yeah.
10 years from now, where do you see Elixir? What do you think will be happening? How popular do you think it will be? Where do you think it'll be?
Oh, this is a wow. This is the tough question to answer, right? Um, well, I definitely, hope that it's going to be at least as popular as it is, relatively to speaking, to the growth of the communities or developers in general. It's kind of hard to say where development is going to be in 10 years. That's a good question, really.
Honestly, right now it's hard to see where it'll be in like 5 years or less, honestly.
Right. So the things have changed. Like I feel like they have changed radically or dramatically in the past few years. So
Yeah.
uh, that's a good question. But what I hope to see is still like this spirit of friendship and human-oriented focus. That's the very first thing that I would like to see within the community itself and with the language. The languages are. I don't know. I mean, Jose always pulls up something new, so we always get some new features in the language now. I mean, the types are obviously the biggest one,
Hmm.
and that's probably going to take them like from what I understand a few years until it fully lands, if it ever lands. Otherwise, I'm going to be curious to see how the whole NX direction, the whole machine learning stuff develops. This is very interesting area that I must admit I haven't been following so much.
I
uh,
am really bad at following it, and I've had Thomas Millar on, and then I just had Sean Moriarty on, and
okay.
those are some smart guys in the machine learning space, that's for sure. And yeah,
I think it's
over my
gonna.
head, but I'm trying.
Yeah, I feel this is kind of like the nerves. This is sort of a completely separate space in a
Hmm.
sense. But this is good, right? Because I never thought like 10 years ago we didn't have nerves we didn't have NX, and it never occurred to me that you could like even use Elixir for some of that stuff, like for embedded programming or for like this.
It's really cool seeing it be used
Yeah.
with embedded programming in
Mm.
the
So
IoT world.
I definitely hope it's going to bring more of the people to our community.
It seems like Elixir is a pretty good place for machine learning and like being able to leverage all the processes and just the overall concurrency to run
Mm.
difficult algorithms and things. Um, but yeah, over my head, I'm trying to read the Sean's machine learning book right now, but it's hard to find enough time to really get consumed in it. But it's really
Mm.
cool stuff. I feel like you don't want to ignore it because I feel like as a developer, you'll be left behind a little bit. But
Yeah, it's hard to say. There are like so many things to learn, but yeah, I definitely also have it on my to-do list to check it out.
yeah. And then is there going to be a book someday? Machine
Uh,
learning?
well, I don't know about that. I think that there are more qualified people to write about that than me. I would like to write some book, another book someday. But yeah, currently no plans about it.
Okay. We'll change that
Yeah.
now. um, what have been your favorite projects or contributions to the Elixir community?
Well, that kind of is similar to libraries, right? So I would definitely. Another thing that I could maybe single out could be Livebook, right? So Livebook is very interesting project in that it helps people explore Elixir or even present Elixir in a more interactive fashion. So this is something that while I haven't been using it myself, it's also on my to-do list. But like I've seen some presentations where like Jose had a presentation, I think. Recently where he basically just made it all with Livebook, and so he was like showing off some demos and then writing some code inside there, interacting with it, and so that's a very nice and interesting
Yeah,
project.
Livebook looks awesome. I'm on the same page as you, though. I keep telling everyone I'm going to learn it, and I haven't yet.
Yeah.
Especially with education, it looks like a really good way to learn how to write code, and you can, compile and run it right there in UI friendly live book.
Exactly. Another thing I could mention is maybe the unsung hero, the Xdoc, right? So Xdoc is really terrific, and it has been like since day one. They of course constantly make some addition changes to the user experience, but it's always great, very snappy. From what I've seen recently, now Erlang documentation is using it as well. It seems to be powered by Xdoc too. And I mean, the whole focus on documentation, on having good documentation and searchable documentation, usable, right? So this has been in my impression, this has been like a big focus since day one.
Yeah, Xdoc, I'm glad you brought that up because it's probably one of my favorite things in Elixir. And then just with like writing unit tests and things where you can just include your doc examples. I think that is like one of the most powerful things we have at our, like you write your example once, it works as documentation and a test. Like it's quite amazing.
Exactly. And how you can like cross-link between, different modules, or you link to like a module from another library and it just works on Hexdoc, so
Yeah.
this is some really, really nice stuff, which we kind of take for granted, just like the Hex package manager as well, right? But it's really important for like the whole general experience with the language.
Yeah, I agree. It is quite amazing. I know you kind of have a tight schedule, so if we were to close this off, do you have any advice for developers that are hesitant or thinking about getting into Elixir, but they haven't pulled the trigger yet?
Well, you should give it a try, right? So, like, I'm not affiliated with Elixir. Yeah, I wrote a book, but I don't really make a lot of money out of it. I'm not trying to sell you Elixir for some personal gain. I'm basically just a happy user of Elixir. I've never realized, that I needed this stuff that I get from that language until I tried it. So give it a try, and keep an open mind and see how it goes. What I typically recommend for new people, as a book author, is not to read the book first. I mean, of course, different people, have different preferences, but I think for many, it's going to be better if you just, try it hands-on, right? And so Elixir has a really good getting started guide, which is kind of like in a tutorial form. You build a simple, small key value in memory, and you kind of follow that guide. You're not going to really know how to write Elixir after that, but you're going to like get a bit of a teaser of how it works. And then the same thing with Phoenix. So like the official Phoenix documentation has a tutorial. I forgot what it was about, but they basically go through all the major parts of the Phoenix architecture. And so you kind of get your feet wet, right? And so you kind of experience in practice. And then maybe, you can consider reading a book or doing some video course or whatever works for you. I would say like pretty much unless you're serious, full serious, maybe not so much need to like read some extensive resource, but more like experiment and play with it.
I agree. And the getting started guides are really good. I think it's a good place to start. And it's funny, I just started, well, I didn't just start, but I've been doing live streams where I've just been reading through the getting started guide. And it's been awesome. It's been very popular. People come on and watch me read documentation and go through examples, and super interactive. It's been a lot of fun.
Exactly. Yeah. So also you can try Exorcism. I think it still works, right? So Exorcism was a popular.
As far as I know, I used to use that all the time. That's nice because you get little just what do you kind of like, not leak code? What's the word? Just little problem.
You get like the exercises, and then people are mentoring you. I used to do it myself, Advent of Code. So like it helped me improve my functional style a lot. And in general, I think if you want to give any language a try, maybe try to do some exercises of Advent of Code with the language, and try to see how that works for you, because those are like more like smaller examples. Typically for Advent of Code, you're not going to need concurrency. You're just going to have to make it functional. And this is a nice part of the challenge. How can I do this without introducing other processes or edge tables and whatnot? and still make it work reasonably fast. So yeah, maybe also give that a try. But yeah, my advice is always, at least that's how I am. Try things practically first, at least a little bit, and then move on to a more in-depth resource.
Yeah, and if I were to give any advice on learning Elixir, start a project to learn it too, because then you're hands-on, and then you have specific things you have to learn to figure out, and then you go and find your solutions, and it's the best way to learn. And at least you're building something at the same time.
Yes, precisely. It's much better than just reading a book and like, okay, what am I going to do now?
Yeah, exactly. Well, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for joining me, Saša. And I'm sure everyone that's tuned in is super appreciative. And you're a huge staple in the Elixir world. So thank you for being part of it. Thank you for coming on my little podcast. I appreciate it. And thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much. It was a lot of fun. And wish you a lot of luck with future editions. And yeah, maybe we'll see each other again someplace.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a good weekend. Testing.